Do we have anyone? Who's here? We have, am I right? Here. Vice President Carolyn Jones. And to my left, we have Board Member E. Bolton. Yep. All right. So on our agenda, well, let's go around and say who's in the room so that people can notice that. Staff from administration.
All right. Good evening. I'm Pam Davis, Chief of Staff, sitting in for the Superintendent.
Jeremy Gallagher, CIO for the district.
Yay. We have
Davis, the Board's Administrative Assistant.
and behind the scenes,
Tech.
just tech. You guys act like that's just
tech. Right? Couldn't do it without you.
We could not do any of this. So much. First on the agenda that changed a little bit, Miss Phyllis. So I had a different one, but it's okay. We will work with this one. This is the one that I had. I had this first, but let's establish the committee work plan. You want to work on that first? Sure. Do you all have copies?
That work plan that we got copies of is the last time we redid the protocol, if I recall.
So this, the copies that we're looking at as a draft for the public to notice is that it's the Board Priorities Ad Hoc Committee draft of a work plan from November 2016 through the school year 2017-2018. Our overarching goal, what I thought we could do is maybe look at this, come up with a tentative calendar. Do you have it? Okay, you good? You good? All right. So our overarching goal. Any comments? Do we happen to have it on the screen? Can we get it on the screen?
Yes.
For anybody? We don't have anybody watching, but just in case.
Well, the strategic goals that appear here, I think the vision and mission are still current, but the strategic goals here are pre-strategic.
Where are you? On this document?
Hard copy, yeah. Yeah. I think the vision and mission remains the same, but the strategic goals we probably want to put in most recently the 5 points from the now culminated strategic plan, because these precede these are the old ones from, like, frankly, 2014.
So when you say strategic plan, are you talking about the goals that we designed as a board?
The original, the one from the last.
Just ended June.
And
then we can transport. We can transport into the other one whatever we come up with.
Okay.
I think that's a good idea.
I completely agree. So these goals are not, these strategic goals are not from that. Is that correct? These are from previous to the, prior to the
this was
strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So do we happen to have those goals?
They can be lifted.
We can find that. So for the
Phyllis might be able to do it.
Yes, they are.
So staff can put that together.
Okay, so we'll just have that. Staff will work on that.
So the overarching goal, you said, I think I heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we wanted to adopt this particular goal. Do we want to modify that a little bit to reflect?
I didn't say anything. I was just asking you all, what did you all want to work on for the overarching goal?
Well, I think right here, at least to begin with, it would just be the charge from the board.
Yeah, well, that was what I was thinking. It has to be the charge.
Just the charge. We'll have to come up with some of those other responsibilities, I guess.
So then we could say for overarching goal at the top, the directive would be to work with the administration and the community to reevaluate the district's boundary lines for elementary schools.
Boom.
So that's our overarching goal. Let me repeat it, Phyllis. It's on page 3, right before the action. It just says, by a vote of the board, it is determined that the directive.
She's looking at the minutes.
I'm sorry, page 3 of the minutes.
Okay.
My apologies.
Okay, so
It's that board charge.
Yeah.
A couple months ago.
Great. That's good.
And then I think the calendar here was the calendar that the previous ad hoc committee submitted for board adoption for board work. So I like the format of listing month by month, but beyond that, everything would be blank.
Yes.
And
Okay.
that's, I'm sorry. I agree with that in terms of the format. I do think that I think this is probably where we're going to spend most of our conversation
Possibly.
in thinking through, our next steps and all that. And I don't know if Ms. Davis is prepared to speak for the superintendent on hers, but I think it's important also to add her comments and thoughts about that as well.
And I do know that the audit, in the minutes, the superintendent was to do an audit, the administration was to do an audit, and she spoke that that's going to take some months. And so when we emailed yesterday, it was maybe around December, we should have some preliminary results. Is that around what you think?
Yeah,
We're definitely prepared with preliminary
That's
feedback
great.
around.
got
Yeah.
a handout that's,
Through the
Well,
power.
that is separate from the audit. The one of the action items was to look at analyzing the programs and then report to the board about where the gaps occur, interest for certain areas and how programs are being built for the schools. So that's what she was intending would take some months to
Yes.
do. So that's the December date.
to be finished, but she had some introductory comments
Yeah.
here.
Yes.
Mhm.
That is correct.
There's a sample included in the handout that we can look at when we get to the profile part. That just shows some of the work in progress. You can see the type of information we're gathering.
Yes.
As a starter.
That's great.
Right. Okay.
Do you want to go through some of that now, or?
We can. I do want to go back
Sure.
one thing on the on page 1 of the work plan. Responsibilities, will those stay consistent?
No.
We should work on those. The number 1 is to, where do you want to stay? Make sure you get the documents. No worries. Organize an effective and efficient year-long calendar of full board meeting schedule for managing the board's workflow.
Right, we're not doing
We're
that.
not doing that. Establish parameters for ongoing review, measurement, and monitoring of the board's strategic goals.
No.
Review board operating protocol and bylaws and recommend change. So, no.
Yeah, if I might add, these were specific to this specific task.
Right.
So I would think that all 5 of these would have to be tweaked somewhat to reflect ours. And I think it's probably within the context of the charge. So I know our charge was pretty wordy in terms of the overall charge. And what we might want to do is look at that, break out the major goal, and then add. I think we already have that done.
Do you want to work on that now or no? It just says the committee's charge is to also assess the current state and make recommendations to the board. It's to work with administration and the community to reevaluate boundary lines for elementary schools. Those are only really 2 things. Do you want to expound on that or?
And that's my thinking is that's the charge, right?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think there's 2 items to the charge, and then we can get rid of 1, 2, and 3 on this list and replace them with 1 or 2
Yeah.
from
Okay.
the charge. And then it's possible that there is some relevance to 4 and 5.
I thought
Yeah.
that. I thought
Yeah,
Don't
okay.
you think?
Yep.
So, and then
I'm
we
good with that.
could tweak those.
So down at the bottom, we don't have anyone in attendance online, but just down at the bottom a little bit, right there, responsibilities of the board priority acts. That's what we're thinking of, just so everybody's on the same page. We're striking out 1, 2, and 3,
Yeah.
and adding, Phyllis, work with the administration and the community to reevaluate boundary lines for elementary schools, and then assess. Or that's 1, and then assess the current state and make recommendations to the board.
Mhm.
And then maybe 3 could be number 4, and 4 could be number 5. What do you think?
Sure, as a first effort. We're going to
What?
divide the charge up in 2. 1 and 2. Okay.
Just take the charge, divide it into 2. That's 1 and 2. And then 3 could be the current number 4, and then 4 could be the current number 5. So they're just being reorganized. And then once we see it in writing, we can
It'll make, yeah.
Absolutely.
I
a
think
little
it
bit
will.
more sense.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Ms. Phyllis?
Yes, I will.
And I'll go over it again. Don't worry about it.
You're taking that from the charge.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Gotcha. I gotcha. Okay. So the charge, just so that everyone knows, is are on the minutes from the last meeting. Here. And I'm specifically looking at page 2 and 3, the charges on both of those pages. And we are taking the responsibilities of the board priorities ad hoc committee, which was now, we're tweaking this to be our boundaries ad hoc committee. And we're taking off the first 3 responsibilities and replacing it with the charge divided into 2. I want to make sure I reiterate that. And then we're moving up number 4 to number 3, number 5 to number 4. And then we'll reassess it again to make certain that this captures everything we want to say.
Yeah, and if I may, I think after today's meeting, which has a lot of content to it, apparently, we might be able to, at least have some direction as to what 4 and 5 might be, or whatever, 5 and 6, or whatever it would be. So that's cool.
Okay. So we have a great framework for our work plan. Does anyone else have any?
I would only add, if I could, the work plan. I like the month by month idea, although it's that the work product that's here is about a whole board calendar. But I do think that it's reasonable for us to kind of think in phases. I think you've kind of presented it that way to the whole board. Right now we're doing the research, and then we're doing this, we're doing that. And I would just hope that we don't wait for, and I don't think this has been the intent, that we wait till we're completely finished to make recommendations. I can see where we're coming in phases to the board to even see if we're going in the right direction. Because sometimes if you wait till the very end, it's like, well, we went beyond what anybody was thinking, or we needed some more input. So I would hope that we would be thinking in terms of phases.
Okay. So would you all like to look at the calendar to kind of outline maybe phase 1? Or do you want to wait?
I would wait till we know some more, because we really haven't done that much content of research. But
I do like the idea of phases. And what I hear you saying, I just want to be clear, that what I hear you saying is that there may be some real action focused or action centered stuff in phase 1, but we can't we can't hold off on doing that, or one thing relates to the second phase. Does that make sense? Okay. And okay. So the calendar, or the timeline, I'm thinking of it as a timeline. The timeline is driven by where we are in any particular phase. Is that what you're saying?
I think so.
Okay.
For whatever it is we're dealing with in a particular phase, we've got our mission and our charge. So we know we're reviewing elementary boundary lines, but within that, there's a number of things to do. Like, are we talking? And I think we are. It was inclusive of magnets. It was inclusive of anything that's elementary grades. So I mean, there's things that we can kind of check off and make sure the board knows our progress. It seems like the board wants to know our progress.
Yeah,
I agree.
I'm sorry. I would also add that part of developing the phase and the actions under the phase, that we put responsible party, like who's responsible for what work. And I'll say this, and you all know I'll say this. I don't necessarily believe that the real hands-on stuff lies in this committee. I believe the overarching planning and moving forward resides in this committee, but we got to have people designated who's going to do the work. Now, the superintendent is ultimately responsible for the day-to-day stuff, but I think we can put in there like what that work task is and who might be designated as responsible for it.
Well, I think really all of the work is administration.
It is.
So the responsible party is really always going to be the superintendent.
It's always going to be the
I
superintendent.
don't know if we have to reiterate that, but I do think, and maybe do you want to know who she's
No,
assigning?
I'm talking about more in terms of broad scope roles. Like we know Jeremy's involved and it's going to help us with the data pieces. It could be, I think, for us to keep track of Like, is there a particular, not person, but not thinking clearly, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But for example, departments that we would need things from, or
Okay.
who can help us with the next one. And I agree, she is ultimately responsible for that. And she will certainly review that. We can put it in a recommendation, but it is her discretion to assign whoever she wants to assign to. But it might help us maintain focus of what we need at any point in time. Does that make sense?
I think I understand. I guess that's just a second level of who she's assigning the work to. I don't completely understand what you mean,
Okay.
but I don't have to. I'm just, I think we can just add a separate column under task, or maybe put in parentheses who is actually going to do that work. Or if you're speaking of this is an IT issue, or this is an audit request, just like a
And that's
department. Is that what
that's
you mean?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And it's kind of like with the community engagement piece. I mean, I would think that that's something this committee might be involved with. That's not necessarily or exclusive to the superintendent.
I understand,
Yeah.
and I agree with you. on
Yeah.
that.
So broad scope is what more where. Yeah. Okay.
And just to be clear for the one person that's online and the people in the room, phases, when I said phases, I meant central, east, west, because that's what, what do you think?
My phases is thinking time-wise.
Me too.
Okay.
Because it might be, because I think the thing that was said that I don't agree with, but I think it's taken root in the minutes, at least from a way back. It's the idea that we're going to spend we're going to spend 3 months here on the central and the east and the west or whatever. The problem is this is not, it can't be divided that way because each of those geographic divisions are going to impact. So I see it more like, as I think you just mentioned when you said departments. There's going to be things that we're going to have the technology people do. There's things that indeed the curriculum folks are going to have to do, like the audit. That's not going to be tech. That's going to be the instructional leadership doing the evaluation.
And if I can just jump in, I very much see the progression of the timeline informing us. So phase 1 is going to inform us of what we need to do for phase 2.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the content that Jeremy has mapped out, I think is some of the background research that you as the board need in order to ask those questions, to push back, and to be able to kind of navigate through what makes sense for the regions. I mean, phases, regions. It's so that we can, what I think the goal is, to make sure across the regions that there is equitable access to our programming and maximize.
Yes, for sure.
Perfect.
I think I just want to clarify. I mentioned phases in with regard to the community. If we're talking about central, but people have a particular interest in the west side, we need to be clear that this particular meeting is about central, or we're going to be discussing central. That's what I meant when I said that. For the community, is really more for the community's perspective. But we can get to there. I think we're far away from there, but that's what I meant when I said that. I just wanted to clarify the statement.
I also just think we need to be clear within this committee structure of what our role is as we move through the phases, and what our role is in particular, but how we want the progress on those phases to be reported out. And I don't have anything fixed in my mind about that, but my thinking, Eve mentioned something about, well, how do we report back to the board? We have to figure out if this becomes, if the information as we get through it becomes more of a full board focus as opposed to ad hoc. And I'm saying that as basically as a question about where does the ad hoc committee work end and the work of the plan begins to get implemented. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Well, I'll just tell you what I think. I think that the ad hoc committee is to work with the community and the administration on collecting the information so that the board can then make some do some big final decisions, and then we are we, along with the administration, are helping the board understand what we've collected. Like, we're doing the research for the board to be able to make those decisions.
And so when we get to a point in whatever phase it is of making recommendations, are we sort of saying to the superintendent, we've made our recommendations and the work of this committee is over or slowed down or whatever? Or are we more of a hands-on work group that works through the whole plan? That's the question. I'm not asking for an answer, but just for us to think about that. And I kind of believe we probably have some difference of opinions about that. And I don't have a perfect answer for it. I'm just putting the question out there.
I think we have to recommend by December or certain things about boundary lines of elementaries.
I agree with that.
By the December,
that's phase one.
That's
phase one, right?
That we meet the criteria of the elementary, and we say this is what we found out, and we might have found out that everything's cool. We might have found out that there are overlapping geographic boundaries. We might have found out that the magnet boundaries are not conducive to our neighborhood boundaries as they're divided. We might find out a number of things, but right now I would say that by December, which would be the end of our first phase, I think we go into December meeting with what we have found out and what we think we should be recommending. Because the reality is this goes into not only the program piece, because the superintendent's folks are going to be doing that as to what's authentic, what's really happening, what needs to be adjusted. This goes into enrollment. There are how many elementary schools that are so under-enrolled, we cannot afford to have them. I mean, we can't because we can't staff them. And there are other ones that are over-enrolled, and so we can't meet the needs of the kids. So I think there's going to be, just in the broad brush of elementary boundaries, it's going to be about program, and it's going to be about enrollment, and I think it's going to also be about, if you will, some aspects of transportation.
Yes.
And certainly it's going to be something about facilities. So I would say that charge is a very narrow charge, as it only relates to elementary, and that's all we can talk about. But I think there are big things within that charge that the board would benefit knowing what we found out.
Right. I'm not disagreeing with that.
I got you. I think we're all kind of agreeing.
Yeah.
I think
we are.
I think we agree on that. I think your question, and definitely, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think your question is, after we found the information, are we making a recommendation to the full board on what we think should happen with that information, or are we just presenting the information and then as a full board we're discussing?
That's my question.
Okay, that's what I thought your question was. So I think, and I'm always, as I share with my fellow board members, I'm never 100% certain, and I'd love to hear the community's perspective as well. I think that we are to gather the information and then present it to the full board, but we've consulted with the administration. So we're kind of like, this is what we found. This is the administration's perspective. This is what we found from the community. We're the voice of the community. We're telling what we found, and then we can have an informed decision and we can have a perspective, but let the board have conversations on. I think we can facilitate that, but not direct that with an opinion. I'm open to.
My hope would be that whatever we recommend would have the support of the administration, the community, and the committee.
I think that's so.
So I think that we would go in as a united front. But the typical thing of any committee work is to do the committee work and then go to the board with certain recommendations. Yes, this CRA is good, or yes, the testing for Walnut is okay. So, I mean, it is the work of the committee to bring back some, as we can. And then there's things that you don't recommend. You don't say no necessarily, although that's possible, but you would say, this we're kind of leaving up to you because we couldn't reach that triumvirate of support of the community, the administration, and the committee, and then the board gets to play an even larger role. But I think phase one should be done sometime by December. and it needs to deal with boundaries and what that kind of shows us. I mean, it's looking like, based upon some of the stuff on the audits, I'm so excited to know this and know too how far along this is, or at least the listing of it. Nobody's making evaluative statements about it yet, but also the fact that we have made certain decisions about suspending Paideia because we weren't doing it anyway. That predates the current administration. So I think we have to gather those things that we think have already been resolved or action has been taken. So I think.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is that we're pretty much on the same page. I think we have said clearly we want this to happen in phases. And I think we know what particular things are of importance that's going to help move us through, especially in phase one. I may be getting way into the weeds, and you can tell me, and I'll just be quiet. But for example, when we on this page where it says program audits, I mean, I'm sitting here trying to figure out, well, what is an audit? And what are we looking at as part of the audit? And I know, huh?
I mean, kind of, we're not.
We're not what?
I mean, we can't. It wouldn't be with the. Maybe I'm wrong. It wouldn't be within the purview of this board committee to necessarily disagree with what the audit is found out by the administration.
No. But we need to be clear what is being audited, and
Okay.
and that direction comes somewhat from us based on what we're trying to determine. All those factors that you identified about enrollment and capacity and all that should be incorporated as part of audits. That's, I'm assuming, right?
Well,
Those are things we want to know.
I didn't take that the program, and we need to get to this.
Okay, we can get to it. That's fine. I may be,
community
like I
and everybody
said,
else is like, what are you talking about?
yeah, I know.
So I think, let me just define program audits. What I understood it to be, it's about whatever the type of school it is. So if Withrow is a school of business, are they truly a school of business? Do they meet the criteria for what the program for a school of business is? If they're a school of agriculture, do they meet those requirements? I looked at it as the type of program that school offers as a specialty. Are they fulfilling that? Are they truly that type of school?
Okay, and so to add to that, if you remember when the superintendent was here, the previous meeting, he identified like 7 variables that people like our guests here, and like Virginia Rose when she was here, and Ozzy, they all brought certain things, and the superintendent kind of summarized those in bullet points. And I wrote them down, except I'm still learning how to work on the computer when it's in front of me, but instead of writing it on paper. So I have it on paper what those variables are, which I think needs to be part of the audit for every school. And that's just my opinion. So I'm just saying, when we get to that point, we can start with the phases. I think everybody's agreeing we need to start doing that, but we can ask those questions when we get there to,
Okay, I think I want us to use the same language, because I feel like I'm speaking Spanglish, you're speaking Spanish, Eve might be speaking German, I don't know. But I want us to kind of use the same language in the minutes, which we didn't technically approve formally. I don't know if we need to do that in the ad hoc committee, but I want to clarify what the superintendent, it doesn't say what you said about the 7 pieces.
I noticed that about the last minutes, yes.
On page 3,
yes.
it says, as an action item, can you pull those up for me, Jeremy?
I do not have the minutes.
Okay.
Yes. What date are those mean? I want to make sure
This
I'm
is from
operating.
the August.
Is this the minutes that we
July.
yet approved?
These are the August 8th minutes.
August
Or
8th.
August 10th.
Okay, we approved August 8th, I guess.
Well, it says these are the August 8th minutes in case you needed them. So, but maybe it's August 10th. I don't know. The last meeting in August.
Yeah. That would be August.
So the action item to the administration,
Go ahead. I'm looking for it.
that action, there were 3, but the action item says Superintendent Wright advised the committee to allow her administration to analyze programming that already exists in the schools before moving forward.
Yes.
She advised that she would like to analyze the program and then report to the board about where the gaps occur, interest for certain areas, and how programs are being built for the schools, and then market what is currently in place.
Okay,
So
that's clear.
yes,
That's
it's very, very
clear.
clear.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing you say is that you would also like enrollment data, because that's not in there. And I'm fine. I want us to make sure we clarify it so that the administration can do what we are asking.
I think for me, rather than belabor it, I can wait and make sure, because I think what I felt when she identified those variables were that it could very well fit, be within that context, because it was to analyze programming, and all of these variables were about programming. And, some of it was like cultural something, I can't remember, cultural aspects or something, but I won't belabor that or get too much into the weeds. I'll just have to bring those notes with me the next time.
Okay.
So if I can just say, particularly about the programming piece, that this preliminary audit has taken into consideration the existing attic prep our schools have. To your point, I believe, Board Member Moffitt, particularly around the tie of this programming to enrollment. I know from not knowing the 7 things that Board Member Jones is talking about, but I do believe that the programming is going to drive enrollment, because ultimately the branding, the goal is to be able to develop programming that attracts. I think Jeremy and I were even talking about the feeder patterns that will be generated, so that across the district, each school will be able to continue to brand and developed at each of our schools. And so the information that you see there is just preliminary. It's not an exhaustive list, but it is like the baseline, so that, as I said, we will be able to determine where and if any gaps are. Because ultimately, if there are schools that have none to few, we definitely want to be able to help them establish what those programming features are for their student population.
None to few what program?
Right. As we're doing the audits, if we determine that there are schools that don't have any or as much programming compared to sister schools across the different regions, that's what I mean. So in other words, that a school has multiple programs that are being offered versus a school that does not have few to zero. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I think it does. Well, my bewilderment looks like
Right. I was like, you sound looks like you have a question.
Every school has a thing. It has a program. My question is, are they truly the
Right.
type of school that they're
right? And I guess that's more of what I'm saying, that maybe they have a program that is not being broadcast or augmented in its full with fidelity, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I would like to add to all of that, the chart we have before us has some things in some schools, but it would also be important for us to see the listing of the most recent effort to give programming to individual schools, try to increase its market share and its feeder capacity, as to the Vision 2020, which was either done in 3 or 5 phases. And that's that Vision 2020 is where I think there is some issues about authenticity. There's also, I think, been some school requests to change the vision.
Yes.
So I think that's part of it. I mean, some of this is career stuff, and some of it's college and college credit plus and that kind of stuff. So this is a great start, but I think it'd be very important, especially considering the focus is the neighborhood schools, that it would be good to see those Vision 2020 things that we signed on and agreed to over about a 5-year plan, to see if those things are still relevant.
Yeah, if I could just kind of give some
Please.
clarity around the chart that we're referring here.
Mm-hmm.
this is definitely not exhaustive.
Right.
And this is just a sampling of the work that's ongoing right now. Like, as the superintendent kind of stated, it's going to be a longer collaborative effort to gather all this. But ultimately, what we're looking at is a comparison between the stated visions of the school currently. We can add identification to what is the 2020 or My Tomorrow designation specifically.
Yes, you will need to do that.
Yeah, but this includes what is currently being publicly stated as their vision and programs compared to what is actual. So you said what the reality is. That's what's being offered at the school. It's also inclusive of those other items you're talking about, like the career technical pathways, the other virtual or the other programs that they have, whether that's a career pathway or if it's just an association with like UC to have a pathway for graduates to follow into that program, as well as their CCP courses and the number of AP courses. So this is just the starter. There is definitely more items to be added, and this is going to be an ongoing effort to get both the comparison of what it is, what it's supposed to be, what we say it is, and then an analysis of the gap of what's missing from the various regions in comparison for equity across them.
I got you. What I want to do, just really quickly, I don't like talking around something that we could just have you all go on ahead and present. So we're going to skip down to, yes, we could. But we've got 3 people online, and I'd like to, what are we talking, what are we calling this? Is this
It's the beginning
profile
of their
schools?
audit that the
It's the
superintendent has
preliminary
agreed to
audit.
conduct. That's going to take several months at least.
Yes, but I'm sorry. Let me clarify
Great.
my question. Is this considered the analyzation of school programs update or the profile of schools?
Correct. This
Which
would be the number 3, the analyzation of the school programs update.
Okay, so let's move down to that so that we can all be on the same page. We're talking about this. I'd like us to just go through it. Can you pull that up, Rob? It's the slides.
You have that, or do you need to share?
But if we could, as we
Yes, ma'am.
move to that, I would again suggest that we do need to see the Vision 2020. And another thing that I think is important too is the type of school. And I'm not just saying magnet versus neighborhood. I'm saying the structure of the school being, is it a PK6? Is it a PK8? Is it a 712? Because I feel very strongly we could be looking at that profile of structure, and we'd start to be able to see where the kids are being more successful in one structure than they are in another structure. So I'm just suggesting that be added as well.
So when
Vision
we get to the
2020.
point of, I agree with Eve on that. And I think when we get to the point of establishing our phases, that's where I think we plug in all that stuff. Where we want, what is it? Is it an audit? Is it just information? We plug it into the timeline of phases.
So I'm not exactly sure which one of you two is presenting from this. Jeremy, that's you. So let me just go ahead and let you take over on this.
Do we just want to go to that particular item, number 3?
Can you just start at the beginning and tell us how we get non-neighborhood name school? This was one of the action items that we had. To the action item specifically in the minutes is hold on.
Yeah, I think it's
it was to ask.
We've never done
We asked about.
We have,
Which schools are truly named after neighborhood schools, or are they in a neighborhood but they're no longer named after the neighborhood that they are in?
Correct.
So that's why
Let
this
them do it.
slide is.
Yeah, so gotcha. So we'll just start at the beginning.
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Sounds good.
So essentially this is a slide that's what it's showing. These are the 14 schools that are named outside of the actual neighborhood in which they reside. So you can see, some of them are named for individuals, some of them are named prior to my knowledge of the history of the district, but you can see that the comparable neighborhood in which they actually reside. Essentially, we provided a list here of what those schools look like in those neighborhoods. If there's any follow-ups, we can happily provide additional data around those. But this is that list as requested.
great, thank you.
So I think we've really kind of talked around this one.
And thank you for that explanation, because I didn't have a clue what that meant. Thank you for explaining that. Yeah.
Because there are also neighborhood schools that are named for the
Right,
neighborhood.
I know.
So
Right.
so-
I got you.
And like I said, so we've kind of talked around this one. I'm not sure that I have a lot more to offer necessarily around the analysis other than this is that sample list of the ongoing work, kind of show where we're at and where we're going with this piece. Again, there's a lot of things to be added over time.
Sure.
But this is really starting with gathering the investigation and the research into what we said the school is and what the school has. And then we add those additional pieces as we go. And there will be a little overlap here as this ultimately all drives into the school profiles, right? We want to add this along with the data that's already there. That's a great call out. I actually had to look, see that. I can't believe I missed putting the grades for each school I need to start with. But that'll be an immediate add, along with other things as we notice and need to add them to those profiles.
Because I think that's part of the choice. At the end of this, people may want to choose specifically a PK8 school. So you want to have that available in whatever divisions. They may only, they may not, or they just, again, these types of schools I think are interesting to analyze where we're having success or more success than others.
I agree. I actually kind of like our AMI and our AWL are strictly elementary, but then where do they go? They go primarily to Withrow, or they go to West High. I like to look at those trends because they're choosing to go to those specific schools for a reason. So we need to look at that specifically around our EL.
It's also interesting too, by hook or crook, or because God is watching over us, I'm not sure. It's kind of interesting that through no fault of our own and whatever, there is some symmetry in the district, especially if you divide it by 3. It's crazy. And that's those types of schools. Instead of magnet neighborhood, you have your international schools, you have your Montessori system, you have your preschool system. And again, the more we can think about systems, the more we will be able to kind of facilitate and accelerate the choice piece for folks and access, to your point.
Okay. So, and this goes to our third action item, but hopefully you'll forgive me, I did expand on it quite a bit. Yeah. Some data I think that we haven't necessarily talked about yet that really was a driver for the start of this conversation as well. But just at the service, our third action item was to start reviewing schools, basically against their designation and seeing what was appropriate. One that we had identified here in the committee and we talked about outside as administration are those elementary college preparatory schools, which is a historic designation that those schools had, so that their 6th and 7th and 8th grade students were allowed an enrollment like a magnet program within the school, but the rest of the school was treated as a neighborhood school. And it has been a historical designation that at some point we kind of eliminated, as the committee talked about, I believe, at the last meeting, that really that's something that all elementary schools are doing. It's not something unique to those schools at this point anymore. However, the enrollment process for those schools has not changed to date. So looking at those 4 as a great starter point to gather more data around those kind of decisions and points that we need to analyze, there's some things we have to think about in the timing. So I added here, and this is just an example from this year, because this work obviously is going to be ongoing and it crosses multiple years of school years and not just this immediate one. But for example, as we start looking at changing these enrollments, we have to factor in the timelines of when things happen. The first being like sibling applications for those magnet grades begin September 20th. We're talking 6 days from now. So if we were to try and change the designation of any of the schools, we have to factor in when do we start the process for deciding who's going to be grandfathered into the current programs, where the schools or the change is going to impact which students, and where they're going to end up having to relocate into another magnet program, another neighborhood school, etc.
Yes.
Okay.
I think anything that we do, it's going to be who's ever there now is going to be grandfathered in for 3 years. Period. That's what's going to happen, or all hell will bust loose on this, and we don't want to happen. I also do feel very strongly this whole college preparatory. I know historically why Covedale and Mount Washington are that way, and why John P. Parker is that way. And that was an attempt, but we don't need to discuss now. But every one of our schools needs to have a college preparatory kind of effort, especially in that 4, 5, and 6. The fact that they don't is why we are having these issues about the passing the walnut test.
Mhm.
And this is inherently discriminatory. It was done specifically, at least in what was believed to be 3 neighborhoods that were going to be predominantly Caucasian.
And
It's as simple as
that's
and
a
we're
very
not just not going to do this anymore.
and that's a very strong point. And I think as I think about those 7 variables that we talked about, like that first meeting, feeds right into that. I mean, those things are what we need to look at to not get to this, where Covedale, Mount Washington, John P. Park, those kinds of schools exist.
And in all honesty, that's what Dr. Rhodes was bringing up when she said that.
I know, exactly.
You know, everybody,
Yeah.
we kind of want to tiptoe around the mulberry bush, but the elephant in the room
Yeah.
is that we are seeing the residuals of
Discriminatory
Yeah.
practices.
Yeah, just, you know,
Yeah.
it's 50 years later, but it's
It's discriminatory. It's also a school district some many years ago, even preceding me in the district, of trying to preserve some sense of middle class during the white flight. It's as simple as that. This was a marketing issue. And now we're past that because we've embraced the multiculturalism and everything is quite different.
I think at that time, the district believed, and probably it was real at that time, that this was a solution to resolving some of the practices that existed then. But I do agree, we're past that.
That's why we exist.
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here.
So the next part is something that Member Bolton actually brought up a little bit ago that like I said, I think has been a driver of this conversation early, and that's transportation. And it's something that we have not looked at yet, but I think is going to be a key data point in adding to, again, our school profiles, looking at what the transportation looks like for each of the schools, especially now we have a system that allows us to visualize that and
Thank you.
provide the impact that some of the decisions will have as we analyze this. It becomes much more critical. So this is kind of an overview first, just so that we can kind of level set as to what we're looking at. So on the left, you see, and this really talks to some of the conversations we've had around the schools of choice and the distance that we travel and transport our kids for those schools, especially in our elementary magnet programs or our high school magnet programs. So this is comparing the AM routes for me to Hartwell, right? So we have a district-wide magnet looking against a true neighborhood school. And you can see on the left, there are roughly a dozen routes that spread across the entire 90 square miles of Cincinnati. Whereas in the neighborhood school, we have 4 buses. Sorry, I should clarify. Each of those the lines in the various colors, that represents a bus route. So that is a unique bus that's running that route. So, and on the right, you can see with Hartwell, much more condensed, stays within the neighborhood. There's a much smaller number of kids. And from an enrollment standpoint, these are equivalent size schools.
Mm-hmm.
They're both around the 400, 450 range. So despite being a neighborhood school versus a citywide school, the overall enrollment is fairly the same.
So roughly, just one quick second. 9, is it? I can't hardly see, but it's like 9 buses on the left versus 3 or 4 on the right.
I believe there's 4 on the right and
9 or 10, yeah. That's
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a little tough to tell at this scale because some of the darker lines, you can see there's some overlap between like the blue and the green at the top.
Yeah.
So you really have to zoom in closer to get a good
Sure.
count as if there might be an extra route in there.
Yeah.
But
I
at
got
this scale, it's more for example.
Mm-hmm. And just if the community has a question, let me know. And if you're online and you have a question, just raise your hand and Rob will see it. Okay.
Next one, again, is a very similar comparison, again, just kind of level setting and looking at 2 days ago. And the AW route versus another neighborhood school. Apologies, I mislabeled that. No, on the right. It says Hartwell, but that's not correct. I'm sorry, Kilgore.
Oh, okay.
Kilgore? It's not Hartwell. Kilgore? Okay.
Number of
Wow.
routes for district
That,
versus school.
that's pretty telling,
One thing
isn't
that
it?
I thought was particularly interesting, gives a good example. And again, I'm not picking these schools for something that we need to change or
No,
just
Yeah,
for
no,
example.
Yeah, absolutely.
But under the lower left, you can see that blue bus route, the really dark one.
Yeah.
Goes all the way out to essentially Sailor Park.
Wow.
Did a little digging onto that one, stood out to me. And we're talking about 3 kids or less
Right.
that we're running all the way essentially to Sailor Park to bring back.
Wow.
I mean, it's just for that context of what our transportation looks like and the challenges it faces. Go to the next one. So this I thought would be a great opportunity, and this is, again, something that I want to do for each of the schools and add them to the school profiles. That's going to take a lot more time to do each of them, but I wanted to focus on the 4 we had talked about earlier in those magnet schools previous for the college preparatory course, and look at some of the details around what they have in terms of their transportation. This is taking a really close look at Roselawn. So on the left, you'll see in yellow is the attendance boundary that we've looked at before.
Mm-hmm.
The pink line is the walking boundary. So previously we've talked about the number of kids who exist within the walking boundary. This actually gives us a visualization of where those kids are at.
I like that walking boundary. I think that's a core approach to all of this. That's great.
Yeah, it provides us a much more, like I said, a visual look of the number of kids that we're talking about. Which, if you can see in this close-up picture, if you notice the bus routes are still shown here, although you can only see the beginning of them. The blue at the top and the green at the bottom, they're just barely within the neighborhood. So if we zoom out on the right, you can see in the upper right-hand corner, that white area with the blue outline, that's the neighborhood attendance boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the bus routes, that blue line is the only one within the neighborhood, and all of the other bus routes essentially are outside of the neighborhood for the magnet grades schools.
Okay,
Special transportation.
because I have a trouble distinguishing pinks and reds and oranges. So on the left side with Roseline, I see what looks like to me red line. So help me with that. This is the pink.
Pink.
Okay, what's this?
Kind of broken up in here.
That's pink? Okay.
Yeah, from up here it is. On the printout especially, you have a slightly different color. Could be
Look
red.
on the
Well, they all look red to me, but it's okay. Thank you. You clarified it. I got it.
Now,
I just made it bigger.
now
This
Roselawn,
is pink.
What's this?
now Roselawn is extra special because it has special needs kids
Outline.
there.
Okay.
Correct.
And it's not necessarily the college
Yeah.
territory, but so that,
Thank
and I emphasize that because we have anywhere from 20 to 25% of our student population are on IEPs, but that doesn't mean they all have these special circumstances like some of the kids at Roselawn would have. So even those special programs need to be organized in a way that is more conducive to transportation and people's neighborhoods rather than what maybe we're doing. And right now, since we do start to have some space in some of our buildings, and we can't possibly put any of our buildings on the market because the charters will buy them the next day. Again, this is that facility piece as well as the programming piece that we could reorganize. And so
We have to do everything very discreetly.
they just can't put anything on the market.
And I honestly, Jeremy, this is just so, I love this data. I'm a data person. But I even can envision one of the phases, maybe it's like the end phase, talking about how cost per child, how much is this actually costing us to bus X number of children outside of the neighborhood? Because that's significant. How much is that actually costing us to bus them? And then how much if we were to have
$50 million.
if we were to have true, if we were to have just neighborhood schools, how much, or whatever the alternative would be. But I think we could look at it from a transportation perspective as well, I don't want to say it's a cost savings, but in essence.
Well, we did when we were talking about more focused around that Meridian plan with the high schools. We did a transportation analysis where we could see exactly what you're saying. So I think I think it's would be of value to us.
Now, let me get on the record. I don't want any of our schools to close. Let's keep them all open because people are choosing them. But from an economic standpoint, something has to give because we're stretching the rubber band way too in some area.
Well, we may need to though.
We got to look at all. We can look at everything, but I mean, we have to.
Well, it has. If we have to do that, then wherever they have to go has to be attractive for them to want to go.
Yes.
And it has to be a successful school.
And it has
we
to
have
be
a policy
successful.
that
That's
we're not
right.
allowed to transfer kids or forced transfer of kids to schools that are achieving less than the schools that they're in.
Yeah.
So there are policies that would restrict what we're able to do. But, if something left, frankly, from Superintendent Mitchell was, okay, you've got some schools that are particularly successful or at least being evaluated that they're successful. The grade from the state, like we have to care about or whatever. You have them, and then next door to them may not be a school. Well, then you know what? You do the IRN number or whatever, and you call school A it's got good rating, which I think is false anyway, but good rating, and this is school B that doesn't. Well, A and B become the A, just in two different buildings. I mean, if we're kind of doing that with Carthage. Hartwell was beyond its capacity, so that's one school.
Mm-hmm.
So you call it that, even if you have to say Hartwell Carthage. So it's like Fairview, Clifton, German, whatever. I mean, there's ways to do this where you're going to have schools that are more highly rated, and where you're going to be able to have enough enrollment that you could staff it with all the things that the kids deserve. These schools that are so under enrolled, we can't afford to staff them to the level that children deserve.
I even think of, again, this is the researcher me. We know how many children were born last year, so we should be able to predict how many potential preschoolers, how many potential kindergartners we have. We need to put that somewhere.
We can do that. The problem is the market share. Right now, we were beginning to win the market share against the charters until COVID. But what I have been told by people, though, to your point, before you start consolidating anything, you better look at the preschool numbers and the kindergarten numbers, because at least out in the community, people are saying the post-COVID numbers in those two grades, you better accommodate for them and figure out, because we have to be careful.
It's coming, and I think that's another perspective that I want to look at. We're interested in the here and now, and that's great. But the projection, we should be able to know within 5 to 10 years what our potential population can be. Now, we need to put programming in place to attract them, but we should be able to know, like, if there's 1,000 kids born, that's a potential 1,000 first graders or kindergartners that should be with them. Maybe I'm thinking of it too simplistic.
No. I think it's okay.
But
I think that I think we could probably do some of those predictions now. I mean, I believe that because folks did not have their young kids come to school on COVID, we probably have the numbers in our preschool and kindergarten, I would guess, are up this year, and that those classrooms are now overcrowded, I would say, because of those kids. But the predictability piece, I think, is good. I do agree with Eve, though, about the market share.
Well, I think we have sort of a glut at the high school level and the early childhood levels, and where we're suffering, even as the COVID went on, was in the elementary grades, and not all of them are elementary. But I like that one. I like that 1 mile, that walking thing too. I think that if that's what transportation is now too, make these things sensible to each other, and also make some choices that are going to be hard, so we're even here in 5 years.
Yeah, and I think that's 2 points that I appreciate the call outs, especially around, because I did pick Roseland specifically to look at this, because it does have that double dip nature of, we have the magnet designation, which drives some of the transportation. We also have the special needs and the special units that are driving part of it as well. So it gives us a perspective on both of those. I thought that was very important for us to see within a single visualization, for these schools.
Keep going, Jeremy. You got it.
One more?
I think you had a question.
Oh, did you? Dr.
Did you have a question?
Oh, no, not a question. I thought Jeremy was going to also mention, which I don't want this to take us in the weeds, but to the transportation piece, that another driver for that is our school start times. And so just in thinking about how we maximize usage of our buses, being able to tier the rollout so that we're not having to use as many buses. And potentially in looking at that magnet neighborhood comparison, still been able to maximize buses based off of just some of this other strategic planning with the feeder patterns, start times, cost savings, all of that.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, because I think part of the idea of not doing quadrants, but again, the three corridors, which is within our culture as a greater Cincinnati area, that if you start doing like we did, let's say with the Montessori's, on the west side, if you're going to the Montessori elementaries, you're going to the west side high school, whether you want to or not, or just know that that's what's going to happen. And then that's true with the east side. Of course, once we start doing that, you're going to know that we need another third Montessori high school in the central corridor. So that it starts to impact what you do with property at the central corridor. So yes, that's exactly it, because then you have that access at a more financially reasonable amount of money, and it's a greener thing to do as well. So as we look at the footprint, so there's reasons to do this.
I'm going to add this, and
Yeah.
it just clicked in my head related to something you said. But we do need to look at it. But even I went to this urban symposium, one of the things they said is that they believe, most of the people, when we heard them talk about changes in their district and whatever, most of them said that if you want to change the culture of learning, that we need to incorporate more Montessori programs that are designed for specific reasons around our kids' needs. So I'm going to put that on the table, that we consider that. We've been talking about it for a number of years, but we have not really delved into it. So, but anyway, that's just another add.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good perspective. You're supposed to take that knowledge and bring it on back to everybody, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, we could bring a lot back, but we just won't do it today.
Oh, Lord. Well, the questions from the community perspective, I want to make sure that we're getting questions in real time rather than later.
Still got
I
two
have
more
another
slides.
comment, but I'm trying to.
Oh,
Sure, I got you. Rob, anybody on the online have questions? Okay.
Well, I think one quick one with the transportation. I think we're seeing right now so many issues with transportation every single day. So I think it's not only cost, I think it is like quality of life, and that how do we frame it to the community that is there not a better school closer to you that you're putting your kid on the bus in Sailor Park to go to school in O'Brienville?
Yep.
There's not any of our other schools that would fit your needs. So I think that's a big thing for me for transportation, is not only cost, but quality of life. That's why I chose where I live, because I wanted to walk my kid to school every single day. I live in Pleasant Ridge, and I am a real estate agent, and I've lived in my house for 7 years now. And I have seen in that time when we moved in there was one other child within a 3-block radius. And now I think there are 40. And the type of person that I'm moving in Pleasant Ridge every single day is young families. So I think it's just talking about like future. And I think a lot of those families they all tell me they want to give PRM a try, and they want to give our district a try. So why are they not choosing us? And I think that's just my like quick little, what I've seen is our district will continue to grow rapidly. I knew Pleasant Ridge was going to be bursting at the seams just watching what was happening, what I was doing and what was happening right around me. I knew it was coming. It was coming when I got there, but yeah, so those are my 2 things right now.
My thoughts are more along the lines of some of our older children, and so this Roselawn Boundaries one, I was really thinking about, I'm one of the booster presidents at our school, and when things happen back at the school and you live by it, you're not always dependent on an adult to be there. We have kids who walk back for basketball practice because it happens at the school. They know how to walk to school. They're already familiar with that route. And they can participate on our teams in an extracurricular capacity because they're in the neighborhood, because they're close enough to come back. That happens on Saturdays and Sundays for games as well. They'll get there at noon and there are games at 4 o'clock and they're hanging out and teachers are there watching, but in their community. They're already comfortable with it. They're already familiar with it. They're welcomed into the building because it's their space. And so I think when kids and families too can come back into the building outside of school hours, it builds such a stronger community fabric. It weaves it together in a way that's just different than the 7:15 or 7:30 to 2:15 day. I think that outside things really do matter. And when it's accessible, because it isn't a 35, 40-minute car ride that's in, rush hour times, and it's just different. You're able to be there and be a part of it in a different way.
I think, the whole neighborhood concept has worked on for at least 170 years, as opposed to what we've done to it. And I understand why we did it. And that's why I still remain, because of the culture of this town, and where even including like Silverton and Amberley and Cheviot or whatever, I still maintain that we've got that walking piece of a mile or whatever, the walking distance. But I think it makes very big sense on marketing for everybody if you are cognizant of the actual neighborhood boundaries within reason. I think that makes a difference. And so I'm glad to hear that. And I also think the best thing about Montessori is that those are our most diverse schools. All of them are the best racial mix we have in the district. And the more we could, if we are really committed to diversity and inclusion, we would be expanding the Montessori program. Because I think that's what people want, and they've already proven that in the Montessori schools.
I'm a Montessori mom, so it worked for 2 out of 3 of my kids. And the one that it didn't really work for is because, in hindsight, he had an undiagnosed learning disability. So it wouldn't work for him in that capacity because he needed more structure. But Montessori, I'm always going to be an advocate for that because I've seen that work. But again, moving on. Jeremy?
Cool.
So I think the next piece, I really liked my geek showing out. I really enjoyed putting this one together because I think it really,
Geek out, baby. Geek out.
it really pulls together a lot of what we've talked about today and in all of these meetings. Right?
Okay.
Great.
This shows that transportation overlay against the attendance boundary, where the needs of the school, the programs. Like we talked about again with Roselawn specifically, it has special programs within the school that drive some of the transportation needs and the equity between that. It goes to our discussion around why it may be a challenge to necessarily designate meetings as east, west, or central, because if we look at the school and the actual impact of its transportation reach and the communities it overlaps with, it's the entire city. Not as easy as just this is a central school that we're going to talk about because it's going to impact changes to other schools. So as we look at this, and we won't necessarily walk through it unless anybody wants me to go more detailed, but if we look at all of the neighborhoods that those bus routes pass through, or the attendance zones for the various schools, they are crossing 15 different attendance boundaries.
Wow.
So again, speaking to, like I said, the equity of the programs that we have available, to our guests, our community comment that, is there a school that's nearer to one of these? We're passing through 15 different attendance boundaries. Is there a school there that can offer those services, or can we offer those services that doesn't necessarily necessitate this kind of a transportation? Like I said, this really, to me, draws together a lot of the conversations we've had, the pieces, and puts them together.
Interesting.
This is definitely we need some community engagement going on, because I would be very interested to learn why a parent who may live in Pleasant Ridge is choosing to go to Reese Price. I'm just giving an example. I think that's just so important to find out from the parents.
I think to Jeremy's point, too, is why, first of all, we don't have the capacity or the resources to offer 4 of everything. But you might be able to offer 3 of everything. And we've tried to offer 2 of everything before, and there might be a mix of that. Like, when we get to the high schools, let's say, or like we did with the Montessori, you might be, but a quadrant was just, we couldn't afford it because you can't do it. But you could do a 3+8 like we do with some of the maggots district-wide versus it's west or it's east. And when you look at our schools that are in our central corridor, they're, even from a career tech thing, it's kind of interesting that you might have comprehensive high schools on the east and the west that are just comprehensive high schools in their neighborhood, and they attract from the west or the east only. But then if you have in the central corridor, you have more career tech like Woodward and Aiken and Taft. Then that central corridor, at least you're transporting kids just halfway. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but there's a way to do that. I still think this thing is easier than, it's going to be hideous and complicated and can of worms and all that, but I think there's some easiness to some of this stuff, just by our own hook and crook.
I do tend to agree with you. I think it can be a little easier than we're making it, but I also think that from a sociological standpoint, our children are transient, and they're not transient because they choose to be. Most of the time, they're transient because their parents. It's a working issue. It might be a job, a housing issue. And so we really almost cannot make some of these decisions in a silo of looking at it simply from our perspective. We also need to, and we will start the city CPS collaborative, but those are also conversations about housing, conversations about workforce, because I know some students have been to 3 schools within a year. To me, that is crazy, but that is their reality. So is it as simple as, and if you have one student whose parent says, you know what, I want you to keep going to the same school, but we've lived on the west side, we've lived in over the Rhine, and now we're over in, let's say, in Avondale, and I want you to keep going to the same school. Transportation now is going to be taking you all around because I want you to be having a consistent education at one school. Or some parents are saying you're going to go to 3 different schools. So I think the community voice piece is super significant, but I also think that we cannot simply have these conversations in a silo, and it's not necessarily as easy as just offering 3 different things, because I grew up and I didn't change schools at all, and some parents don't want that, so they're going to utilize our transportation, which is an extra cost, but because they don't want the duplicity of services. So I just think we need to hear their voice. Yeah. What were you gonna say?
I definitely think we need to hear their voice. I'm mulling over this idea in my head that where is the line between selling people on our district versus selling people on an individual school?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Have we truly sold people on our district as a whole, or have we in pockets sold people on individual schools? And how do you strike the right balance of those 2 things, right? Because an individual school is very important. It can feel like a second home, but what we really want is for them to buy into the whole district and what's happening across the board, and not just, I only feel safe with my child attending this one building where I've made these 1 connections. So how do we find that middle ground?
And I think that's super important to this point that someone pointed out to me. The news media even says, hey, Cincinnati Public School is closed and Walnut Hills. It's Cincinnati Public School.
You know better than to get me started on that.
Well,
so.
I don't want to.
We'll have time.
I don't know if I
Eve.
really
We'll
have
have
time. But to your point,
Sure that Walnut had the same. And that
Yeah.
took 2 or 3 years. I do want to say, though, if I could, on this, the mobility piece, which is critical for all urbans especially, but certainly for us, I do know that way back, and this was during Mrs. Blackwell's superintendency and part of Mrs. Ronan's, on the mobility piece, it was part of the study that was conducted as to why we began a curriculum effort, because you didn't want kids, moving from one high school to another high school, and they had a completely different curriculum at the different time at the same time of the year.
Right.
So that was one of the reasons that we moved heavily into curriculum. It took us a while, but that mobility was part of it. And then we did at least 2 different studies that were very interesting. And this has got to be 12 years ago now, and maybe 11 years ago, where we told the kids that had to move because their families were moving or something else was happening. We studied that sampling of kids that moved, or could choose. We said, can the kids, regardless of where their residence is, can they stay in that school? And we looked at that for their sake, and I think in some parts where it did it, but the other part was that when they did the study, allegedly, the administration did the study, they found that the kids' achievement did not decrease because they changed schools.
Right.
So we were like, well, why are we spending this additional money to keep them there? We're thinking we're doing something that's good for them, but in reality, their achievement is not suffering. Maybe other stuff is suffering or whatever. So that mobility piece, I mean, even the most conservative think tanks, and I'm trying to think of one in particular that spent like the 200-300 pages on mobility, and they used us as the sample, and it was interesting lessons.
I'll make a quick comment. We've gotten, and which is okay. I'm not criticizing it, but we've gotten way into the weeds of what I think our phase plan would look like. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the meeting, I offer a recommendation around how we might move forward with that. Yeah.
Well,
and it's okay. The conversation was good, I think,
it's
but
essential.
the discussion was good.
I think that we were kind of just going through the slides, and
I know.
Some community perspective was great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Were you done, Jeremy?
There was a couple more slides, but nothing critical. Essentially, just extra data points.
Okay.
So we can add on going forward to the school data profiles. We previously had the percentage of students who were within walking distance. With the additional data we were looking at, we can now show the percentage of the students that are assigned to a bus. And then that'll obviously give us the difference, so we can tell students who are not riding. And then there was a breakdown. You can feel free to just look through the printouts. But for the other 3 schools, it's not a step-by-step breakdown like we did with Roseline, so that we can understand the details. It's just a one-off of each of the Coverdale, Mount Washington, J.P. Parker. The number of students that are assigned to bus routes is on each page, and then an example of what the bus routes currently look like. Just a quick call out for each of them, I would say. Coverdale shares some of the commonalities of Roseline in terms of diversity, but Mount Washington and J.P. Parker, you can see both are largely within their attendance boundaries. There's very little students that are routes that go outside, just for comparison of data points.
I think the superintendent.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi.
So I just came in, but I just wanted to share one thing to that point, and I'm not going to say anything else, I promise. The team was taking care of it. But that's one of the reasons that I continue to go back to the audit that we're talking about, because I don't think that it's foreign that in a school district that's had some of the challenges that we've had, that's had some of the focus that we've had on certain schools, the way that we've had to focus in a school district that has really tried to look at what we were doing in neighborhood schools, but where are we right now in terms of what that was in terms of the plan and where it is now. I think that that's how we get individuals that really don't want to leave their environment. And it's probably more so in this space that I observe that than I have in my other 2 spaces. So I definitely think it goes back to programming. And to your point earlier, we as a district right now, and I even think about transportation, we have really tried to give every single thing that we could across the board to every single person, and all well-meaning, and they all need it. But what are we doing on the opposite end in terms of that? So the work that was done around alignment in terms of curriculum across the district is one of the most important that we could do, because it's one of the most equitable for students. Now it's making sure that with the new curricula that we have, there is actual implementation of that curriculum in
Thank you.
school buildings, so that as children are, as we're saying, if you are changing, this is what's happening. So I come back to that. I don't know of a school district that has, and I was, just seeing with 4 veteran superintendents today, really even talking a bit more about transportation. I don't know of a school district that except for students that are in a homeless population or they're in a doubled up situation where we are required to provide transportation to keep them in the place where they were. I don't know of a school district that says mom moves from this location to this location, and then we say that we're going to continue to transport you to keep you in this location.
Yeah.
And so instead, can they stay in that location? Absolutely. But can the school system take responsibility of the transport, depending on where the change is? And so I've seen it where it's very successful, in terms of saying, if you can provide transportation, you can stay. But otherwise, we have to get you into an area, because the other thing that happens, which is the next layer of data that you look at, when you live in one neighborhood and you're going across town to another neighborhood, albeit transportation, not talking about transportation, what does attendance look like? What does tardiness look like? And a lot of times it's because children are going so far from where they are that collectively they're not able to then get back there. So when the kids that are being picked up late, what do you find? A lot of times they don't live in that area. And so families can't get there to get them on time in those situations. So that's why the audit is really important. I spoke with Chairperson Moffitt, just to say we knew, because as we're talking about it, it's pretty deep in terms of going through it, and it would take us at least until December. And I said at least, and I have to update the team if it's going to take a little bit longer than that. But it'll take at least until that time to do it at the deep level that we need to around the quality of programming. So that's the last thing to say.
To your point, before you walked in, I said something similar to what you were saying about the being late to school or being late to picked up. It's just the inability to come back for things that happen and to be a part of that school in an extracurricular standpoint as well. It's just more challenging.
Well, you don't have anybody to play with. I mean, when you get back home from school, this is what the people in Madisonville who send so many of their kids to like the Sands, I think, is where a lot of those kids go. And okay, they come back and my Sands friends, this has not been good.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Oh, no.
Okay. All right. Well, this is just robust conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Were we over at 5:30 or 6?
5:30.
Okay. I wanted to check. So we did not get through everything else,
No.
but we can definitely add that to the next.
Well, I don't know. I think.
Well, we didn't do the history of the Marine Plan. We didn't do the profile of
we did
schools.
that last time.
Profile of schools?
No, profile of schools. They're working on.
Right.
Yeah, that's
But this
one
is
of
the
the.
profile right here.
Right.
Okay.
We did review
Okay.
it last time.
Yeah.
We did do that.
Yeah, and we did the profile we did last time as well, but we brought those back because we added some additional elements. The one piece that we didn't have, and you may have taken it off because we communicated, but it was the audit piece. That was the one that we did.
I also think that some of what we're calling profiles of school we talked about that may be included in the audit.
Yeah,
So
for the Vision 2020, but also the structure of schools, like the PK 8 or something versus the PK 6 or whatever. That's all part of the profile. But the sheet that you gave us is
I think
the
It
ongoing
is
work,
the
right?
beginning.
Correct. I would just say
Yes.
from the school profile, that's kind of, or the profile of schools is kind of an ongoing for every meeting that is the basis of it that we started, and then each of the discussions we have around like the audit, around these additional pieces, those are things that will layer on top of the school profiles going forward. So it's just a continuous building. So
Yeah.
really everything we discuss is a portion of that topic as a whole.
When I'm talking about audit, this is the profile. Like this doesn't.
Right, there it is.
Right. This doesn't
The long
change
sheet.
much in terms of what is happening. It's the type of program, magnet, Montessori, or neighborhood program. It gives the demographics and any additional demographics. And so we keep adding on additional data. What I'm talking about for programming is, okay, now if we say that it's a magnet school, what is the magnet program? What's the level of implementation in the building for that magnet program? Is it actually a program that's active and it's actually encouraging students to come in, or is it one in need of support? So it's really deeply looking at each of the individual, programs and the My Tomorrow initiatives that are happening in the school. So going through each of them to provide some feedback back on this is the level of now what we see happening in those programs, so that as we're able to start making recommendations about where we go next, we do that with the lens of this is what we say we have, this is what we really have, these are recommendations possibly moving forward, or where we do some additional feedback on where we go moving forward.
And Dr. Davis did a very good job of representing that. So I will say, I think some of our committee members had a different opinion about profile of schools, but I understood that that's what it was. So I think we were aligned on that. And we just didn't.
Audit's programming, right?
Hmm?
Just so we're all saying the same
It's
thing.
programming.
Audit is about programming.
Correct.
And the profile of schools is the demographics or whatever.
Correct. Demographics, type of school, location of school, what
Grades.
It's right. It's
the
the
big
first
page.
2 pages, right?
Yeah.
And then the individual sheets go just to show more information about that school, but it really lifts off of this document and puts it on individual pages.
So action items for next month. We are going to work on the calendar, or do you want to?
Well, I just have a thought. If the calendar means like working through those phases, that's part of the calendar planning. It might be helpful just to save time if we kind of put something together and come prepared with some broad scope
Great.
ideas of it.
That was my next.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you beat me. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Keep going.
No, I was just going to say,
One
just
line.
so we won't
homework.
get too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, homework.
Yes, we only have minutes.
I know.
So that was what I was thinking, is that all of us together.
Phases.
Yeah, let me finish. Don't cut me off.
It's okay.
I'm good.
Payback. So, Ms. Phyllis, you're going to be able to update the draft of the work plan and send that out, and we will collectively work on this with the updates of the responsibility, the overarching goal, the vision, mission. Some of the strategic goals will be updated for what the current strategic plan is, and then a calendar. Everyone will put their thoughts in,
Yeah, that sounds.
and then we'll have it be a working calendar,
For
working document.
agenda for next time. I again would like to see more of that 1 mile, that walking distance for all of the elementary, and then also I still keep concentrating on, because of what y'all have been saying too about the whole neighborhood boundary piece. But that I would like to see that. The other thing is I would really like to have an agreed to list as to what are magnets and which ones of our schools really are magnets and which ones really aren't. I mean, they're listed, but just if we can, because there's stuff that's even been on the website that I'm not sure. So if we could just spend some time agreeing as to what is a magnet and what isn't a magnet.
So what?
May I ask a question here?
Yeah.
So if I may,
Yeah.
may I suggest that we come to a consensus on that after we do the audit?
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. Because as we start to do the audit, we're doing the audit based on the information that we're given for what currently is. So this is based on what's on our website, what we already have at the state level. So then if it's going to be changed, we'll be coming to the board saying, especially if the name was changed, like the Paideia, for example.
Yeah.
So
That's fine. That's cool. I'm just saying that what I think is currently understood is not necessarily what was or what is.
I agree.
Or not only we're not doing it, but then indeed it got changed already. So that kind of stuff. See, I agree with you. We won't be able to do the magnet neighborhood this that until we have, like you're doing, the authenticity of the,
So you're saying that there are, so that for the, because we did this from the school guide from last year. So you're saying that from that guide, there are schools
There might be.
that are, okay, that might be marked as magnets, but they lost their, I won't say lost, that's a bad term, but they no longer have that designation,
Yes,
but we're
it's
still
possible.
calling it a magnet.
Yes.
Yes?
It
I
may
think
not
that's-
have
so-
anything that's magnetizing kids to come to it. I mean, by the name of magnet, it should be
and that'll be part of the audit piece.
attracting people.
Right,
So
right.
just for clarity, there are, the list that's right in there is accurate, up to date in terms of, so there may not be a program that it designates or lives up to the magnet expectation, but it is the enrollment of the school currently is aligned to be a magnet. So it is up to date in terms of what is real today in terms of everything else short of the program.
I'm just saying that, let's say 3 years ago, when it was decided that indeed the Montessori kids on the east would go one place, the Montessori kids on the west would go one place, and that was a decision, the process did not change, which is why we have the problem at Clark and the under-enrollment or whatever at Gamble. So I'm just saying, I just would like us to make sure that we, the audit will determine if something is authentic, but I'm just saying, I think even the classification, categorization may be wrong because it didn't get carried out or something.
That's actually from an action item that we had. The administration will determine which schools are or are not magnet schools. Look at how schools are designated, determine what percentage of schools of students live or do not live in the neighborhood boundary lines. Do an audit of the schools and determine the neighborhood schools that do not carry the name of the neighborhood. So we did do part of that. We've got the audit that's on deck, and we've got what we're missing from that action item could be which schools are or are not magnet schools, and then looking at how those schools are designated and determine what percentage of students live or do not live in those neighborhood boundary lines. Is that what you're wanting?
Yeah, that's,
Because there was three
we're
things in
close
that
to all
action
of
item.
that. We're close.
Does that make
Maybe
sense?
we can just bring it up next time. And
I think that what Jeremy's, because the other information is in these documents outside of the audit piece.
right,
I think what I'm hearing is what Jeremy is saying is based on all of the information that we have right now,
Right.
these schools are supposed to be magnet schools. I think what I hear you sharing is based on a historical perspective, there may be some of these schools that the board was told were no longer magnet
Right.
schools.
correct.
Right? Okay, so that piece we would have to then get from the board.
And we
or if
can do
there's
that
an
next
action
time.
item, that way we can cross
Sorry,
reference it
yeah.
that way. Does that help?
Yes,
Yeah.
it did.
Are you saying that the board was told that, or they just have kind of lost that designation? That's what I kind of hear her saying.
That
they're
not
really
everything
magnet.
that gets done gets translated.
So like Padea, it's not a Padea.
Padea has been eliminated.
So
Yeah.
but is that still listed as a magnet, or is it as a neighborhood?
Silverton.
Schroeder, for example, Silverton was something different. Let me see.
Woodford would be a perfect
Woodford, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like Woodford was
Woodford is
listed as
no
a
longer.
magnet. It was a Padea.
It
It was
was
a magnet.
Woodford
right.
is still completely a magnet.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's right.
And that's what I'm talking
That's
about.
what's
That's what I
happening.
think
Yeah,
is
that's true.
you're asking for. Is that
Similar to the ones we looked at today.
Yeah, it could be.
Yes.
I mean, and
They-
the good thing is that nobody in this room is for that not getting done.
right, right? But I think
Other
what
people didn't get it
I
done.
think that what you're asking for
The whole
are,
idea thing just kind of
it went away.
disappeared
away.
into the night. That was not something.
Right.
And that was an audit that the
Announcement.
previous superintendent conducted about Paideia, or you, as anybody using it as a Paideia
Well, I
teacher
think that that's
myself.
what you're asking for. Or schools like that, particularly the Padeas, they were listed as a Padea magnet, but they're not. But they have the magnet enrollment. They have everything magnet.
Yeah,
And like Silverton, so Silverton is on this list listed as magnet.
yeah, and it's not.
Right?
Yes.
So I think that that's what we're saying, but it's
And because that's the case, there are streets in Silverton, that neighborhood, to Pleasant Ridge Montessori.
right, but that's two different things.
Yeah.
So what that will do is when we go into the school and say, what is the magnet, right?
Yeah.
And then we look at all of the indicators that would say, this is the program that's supposed to be the magnet. We can share, okay, this is what we've seen. It's supposed to be an arts magnet. but there was no arts happening in the school
Yeah, you
building.
got it.
So then that gives the update. So I think that'll still give, I understood that Padea, but it sounds like for some of the schools, even though Padea is gone, they have now adopted a different type of magnet, or at least said that there's a different type of magnet adopted.
They've
Or
not lost that.
Or the enrollment
Right.
process did not get changed.
That's correct.
So
They
there's
go
not
back to
alignment
neighborhood.
between the
I don't
program.
think they've said there are any,
Yeah.
they just continue
Right.
the way they did
As a
previously.
Yeah.
Right, as
magnet,
a
with no
magnet.
magnet program,
Yeah.
which gives you selective enrollment.
Yes.
Which is inequitable.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
You got
So
it.
that's what I think.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
Padeas,
Got it.
the Padeas are.
The right hand, the left hand were not necessarily talking, or it was easier not to talk to each other.
I think, to be honest with you, I think it was just easier not to deal with that because it feels like it was easier not to deal with it. Because it's so many other things. It's policy ramifications. It's just so much other stuff. It's just easier to say, let's not. So that's one action item. I do want to bring up that another thing that we talked about was the administration will look at out-of-boundary schools to determine if they're really, okay, we did that, if they're really magnets, as well as what services students need and want across the district.
That's the same.
So that's the same thing, okay. And then another thing that I had a question mark about, and maybe you answered it, Jeremy, how big of a problem are attendance boundaries? Include elementary magnet and elementary Montessori, and how wide of a problem is this for CPS neighborhood schools? So some of that you already really kind of
Yeah,
touched
we
on.
reviewed that
Yeah,
last
last
time in terms of the
time.
number
That
of
was
boundaries that
interesting.
overlap with each other and
Got
what
it.
doesn't align to it was in the presentation last.
Got it. Okay. So any other questions?
That list of what you gave today, which is the list of named schools that are still neighborhood schools, and the neighborhood schools, I just want to see them up on, and I think you've done this. I want to see those several, these 14 and the other 20 or whatever it was. I just want to see them on a map of the district. I mean, that was so helpful when we did, remember, preschool deserts, when you really see it right now, at least within the city and some of our outlying areas, almost everybody has a neighborhood school.
Okay, so we are 9 minutes over. Does anyone have any questions? We've only got one person online. Rob, anybody? Did you have a question? No, Miss Tammy, you don't? Okay. Any questions here?
Thanks
Are
for
there
coming.
schools that are magnet grade level, but not magnet for the whole building?
It's that college preparatory baloney.
Is that the only place that happens?
And
I
what
guess
about-
would be my question.
One of them, for example, is supposed to be silver,
Correct.
for example.
Yes.
That's one that I can
Yeah.
tell you that just from visiting schools, I know that that's what it's supposed to be.
Okay.
And Cheviot has the additional gifted program as well, which ultimately probably should be merged with Spencer. It should be just Spencer from West versus Spencer East. That would make it much clearer to everybody.
Well, we can definitely talk about that next time. Any
Yeah,
other
let's go.
questions? Okay, well then, if there aren't any more, I'm going to adjourn our meeting at 5:40. Thank you all so much for coming by.
Good.
And our next meeting,
Stuff.
just to let you know, is October 25th at 4 p.m. Wednesday, October 25th at